Welcome to Silmarillion chat number 6. I think we're on chapters 13 to 15 now of this my response and discussion of the read along I'm doing with some friends. 13 is the return of the Noldor, to Beleriand, to Middle Earth. 14 is of Beleriand and its realms, and 15 is of the Noldor in Beleriand. And of these, you've got a slightly longer one. Return of the Noldor is 12 pages, so quite long. Then you have a 7-page in of Beleriand and its realms, and a 6-page of the Noldor. So the first of those chapters is equal to the other two chapters. The Return of the Noldor here is the linchpin chapter in this. I mean, I've set the readings, I've decided what they are, so it's biased. But in this section, it follows on from two shorter chapters describing some of the history going on in Middle Earth before the Noldor return, i.e. of men of the Sindar, and it comes, and before those is the very important chapter, really a dramatic peak to that point, the point at which you get the rising action come up pretty much to its peak nearly, with of the flight of the Noldor and the kinslaying in Alqualonde, the burning of the ships at Losgar, and Feanor's corruption essentially, as he's so obsessed with regaining the Silmarils, and we hear this is more important to him, avenging his father. But the Return of the Noldor, therefore, is about these elves, the second kindred of the elves coming back, those of whom, 90% of whom have gone into exile following Feanor. Some few, well, slightly less now, because Finarfin at least, and maybe a few others have gone back to join the kind of those who refuse to come. And they're going to fight the great enemy Morgoth, never again called Melkor by the elves, always called Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world. So yeah, of the Return of the Noldor is the key one here, and you get now to the second of the great battles of Beleriand, and these are really campaigns. This is the Dagor Nuin Gileath, the Battle Under the Stars, where the first one happens technically under the stars, I guess, but is where Thingol and Círdan, the Sindar elf leaders who already live in Middle-earth, fight a great invasion, partially win, partially lose. One of their allies, Denethor, the leader of the Green Elves, dies. Here, you have the Noldor coming to relieve the semi-besieged Sindar. And Morgoth starts off pretty upset. He was dismayed. 10 days that battle lasted, and from it returned of all the host that he had prepared for the conquest of Beleriand, no more than a handful of leaves. Yet cause he had for great joy, though it was hidden from him for a while. For Feanor, in his wrath against the enemy, would not halt. So this gives us the first important event, is that Feanor charges on, presses on behind the remnant of the orcs, and he wants to come to Morgoth himself. And nothing did he know of Angband or the great strength of defence that Morgoth had so swiftly prepared. He doesn't, even though he can't harm, it even says, even if he'd known he couldn't harm Morgoth seriously, he would have kept going. And he's trapped by Balrogs and wounds. He fought on, undismayed, though he is wrapped in fire, wounded with many wounds. But he was smitten to the ground by Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, and this is a classic Silmarillion foreshadowing, whom Ecthelion after slew in Gondolin. There he would have perished had not his sons in that moment come up with force with his aid, and the Balrogs left him and departed to Angband. Balrogs being spirits of fire, Maiar, angels of fire, who were the first to side with Melkor Morgoth. And his sons take him back, and he dies. He knew with foreknowledge of death that no power of the Noldor would ever overthrow Morgoth, but he curses Morgoth thrice, and he tells his sons to hold to their oath to find the Silmarils against all comers, and to avenge their father. And then he died, and his body burns up, so full of fire is it, so full of the spirit. And his likeness has never again appeared in Arda, neither has his spirit left the halls of Mandos. Thus ended the mightiest of the Noldor, of whose deeds came both their greatest renown and their most grievous woe. Eucatastrophe is a Tolkien theme, isn't it? And we've already had that with Manwë seeing, even in the midst of this tragedy, disaster, rebellion, great and good things and beautiful things will come. And they come to they come and meet the elves who already live there, and they find them wonderful. They're like, man, the Valar have sent us aid. Morgoth is so overawed by it, for now at least, he promises peace. He acknowledges defeat, it seems, and offers terms even to the surrender of a Silmaril. Maethros the Tall, the leader of the brothers, the eldest, also the good guy, the one who opposes, who wants to go and get the other Noldor on the boats and stands aside from the burning at Losgar. He says we should feign terms, but the Noldor didn't mean to negotiate in good faith any more than Morgoth did. Certainly, Morgoth did not. It turns out they both take large embassies, and Maethros is seized and imprisoned. But they were constrained by their oath and would not for any cause forsake the war against the enemy. Maethros is taken, the leader, the wisest, the most decent it seems, but Maethros is hanged by the wrist of his right hand in a ring of steel. And now, across the Arctic, essentially, the Helcarac say the misty land of ice to the far north, the rest of the Noldor, abandoned by Feanor's host, turn up. Fingolfin and those of the house of Finarfin who have come, and he unfurls his blue and silver banner, he blows his horn, does Fingolfin, and flowers sprang beneath his marching feet, and the age of the stars were ended, because the sun and the moon rise, I guess, is it the moon first for the first time? The great light is the sun, I guess. Morgoth's servants flee, and Fingolfin comes in and gets to Angband, challenge Thangorodrim, and Maethros hears them. Fingolfin is of another temper than Fëanor, we're told, and he withdraws because he thinks that, maybe he won't be able to do very much here. He goes to find the sons of Fëanor, and he wants a fastness, so he goes to a place called Hithlum, and they meet those of the sons of Fëanor. There was peril of strife. The people of Fingolfin and of Finrod, son of Finarfin, were still more numerous than the followers of Fëanor, and that those now withdrew before them and removed their dwelling to the southern shore of Hithlum. And indeed, we hear Fëanor's people repent, or many of them do. They'd have welcomed their friends, but they dared not for shame. And thus, because of the curse, this chance, whilst the sun is high in the sky, and for presumably some period of time, days, months, years, Morgoth's armies are fled. They can't actually take advantage of that. But Fingon wants to heal this feud. Remember, Fingon had been friends with Maethros, very close friends. And though he knew not yet that Maethros had not forgotten him at the burning of the ships, the thought of their ancient friendship stung his heart. There's a parallel here, in some ways. It's loose, but it's definitely there, I'm struck, with the story of David, Saul, and Jonathan in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where Saul becomes jealous of David and becomes his enemy, even though he's appointed him to a high rank originally. But David and Jonathan always remain friends. And Jonathan is under the curse that Saul's under, really, but their friendship remains untainted, and Jonathan is a hero. And Fingon and Maethros, there is this thing where they both care about each other, and they're both willing to look past disagreements. And so he dared a deed which is justly renowned among the feats of the princes of Noldor, and he doesn't ask anyone else. He goes in search of Maethros. He defies the orc. He takes his harp and sings a song of Valinor, and he sings, and then Maethros sings back. He finds him using music. Music in Tolkien is usually, not always, but usually a sign of order. Pretty much. There are a couple of examples in The Hobbit of evil creatures singing songs that are evil, but chiefly these things are like music represents good and order, particularly in Lord of the Rings. I have a video about that, in fact. But here, what happens is Maethros wants to die. Fingon sees no better hope than killing him, so he cries to Manwë and says, "O king, to whom all birds are dear, speed now this feathered shaft, and recall some pity for the Noldor in their need." And then the eagles brought news of much to Manwë, and Thorondor, king of the eagles, comes and takes Fingon up to Maethros. Fingon doesn't know how to get Maethros out, but he eventually cuts off his hand so that Maethros can escape. And Maethros is healed, for the fire of life was hot within him, and his strength was of the ancient world, such as those possessed who were nurtured in Valinor, particularly in the time of the trees. He never fully recovers. Maethros begs forgiveness, and he waives his claim to kingship, if it were by primogeniture. He's the eldest son of the king, Finwë, but he waives it and he says, "No, I don't need that. you be king. If there lay no grievance between us lords, still the kingship would rightly come to you, the eldest here. So he sees it as an elder, being an eldest brother, as seniority based rather than primogeniture. And not the least wise, but to this his brothers did not all in their hearts agree. So the House of Feanor is known as the dispossessed because the overlordship passed from it. You see more parallels to, certainly to David and Jonathan's son eventually being housed and looked after by David, and that sense of a kind of giving over and an acceptance of the passing of the right. And you can find other mythological exemplars of the same, of reconciliation after the king dies. Now Thingol, he's the king of the Grey Elves, he had seen Valinor, but his people hadn't. He'd been lost in a wood, he fell in love with a magical wood. He fell in love with an angel, a Maiar, and his people stayed. He's not sure about these people. He doesn't really welcome them. He doesn't want to give them land. He does let Finnefin's house come because their mother is his niece, Eowyn of Alqualonde. And Angrod goes first and tells him what's happened, but doesn't mention the worst stuff. He innocently, it seems, he thinks all grief's now forgiven. He's true and wise-hearted and thinks all things are forgiven, so he does not mention the kinslaying. He thinks that was in the past and we've all suffered and we've reconciled with the other Noldor and we are moving on. So it's a funny thing that it's not deceit, and it may be perceived as deceit. And in our section here, later, 2 chapters later, Thingol sees it at some level as, something else has gone on here, hasn't it? Even if he doesn't fully know. But here, Angrod is not hiding. He just thinks, well, we've resolved it, so no one needs to talk about it. And he says the Noldor can have basically the marches and the highlands. And Maethros actually correctly says, basically just giving us the land he can't defend anyway, so it's not really like he's giving us a gift. But nonetheless, indeed Doriath alone would be his realm this day, but for the coming of the Noldor. Therefore, in Doriath let him reign, and be glad he has the sons of Finwë for his neighbours, not the orcs and Morgoth that we found. Elsewhere it shall go as seems good for us. He says, go for it. Look, he's not really in a position to not grant us this, but also let's just get on with this. Caranthir, who loved not the sons of Finnefin, Caranthir turns out to be consistently the most annoying son of Feanor, unlike Maethros. And he basically says that the sons of Finnefin have plotted with this dark elf. He is not a dark elf. Dark elf means they dance in the light of the trees. And let them not so swiftly forget their father. Finnefin's sons is a son, lord of the Noldor, though their mother be of other kin. Angrod was wrathful and went forth from the council. Maethros indeed rebuked Caranthir, but people feared the fell spirit of the sons of Feanor. Maethros departs with his brothers, restraining them, and he sorts them out. Maethros is attempting to make things work. He is a good man who is attempting to recover a situation that wasn't really of his making, even though he has sinned and erred in it. And they defend the most indefensible place. They put themselves at the front of the battle in a very flat area of land. And it said indeed that Maethros himself devised this plan to lessen the chances of strife, and because he was very willing that the chief peril of assault should fall upon himself. And he remained, for his part, in friendship with the houses of Fingolfin and Finnefin, and would come among them at times for common counsel. Yet he also was bound by the oath, though it slept now for a time. We know this oath is going to bring disaster. We've already been told that. We get some information about where they are. Caranthir particularly becomes friends with the dwarves. That's interesting. Then 20 years of the sun have passed. There's a long period, there's hundreds of years before the third battle, and I think it's hundreds of years before then, and then hundreds of years before the fourth. We're talking about a long period of peace and beauty and joy. There's a great feast held by Fingolfin, and all of the Noldor come together, and many of the chieftains and people, at least of the sons of Feanor, Maethros and Maglor, and also Grey Elves, Círdan their lord, i.e. Círdan of the Grey Havens later. There even came Green Elves, but only 2 come from Doriath, Mablung and Daeron. So it indicates this distrust Thingol has for the Noldor and this fear he has. And everyone's very hopeful. and they think they're going to be able to deal with this. We now get an important thing, which is that Finrod and Turgon both they come together. They're friends. Turgon is son of Fingolfin. Finrod is the eldest son of Finarfin, and they both feel like they both have a dream from Ulmo, the god of the sea, thinking they need to find fastnesses, strongholds, and they both go off to try to find that out. Finrod, Galadriel, they go to Thingol, their kinsman in Doriath, and Finrod is inspired by Menegroth, the Thousand Caves, and thinks we need to do something like this. And he makes this home in Nargothrond eventually, and he has something made for him by the dwarves he becomes friends with. Interestingly, like Caranthir, the necklace of the dwarves Nauglamir. Finrod Felagund. Felagund is dwarven for hewer of caves, one of the very rare dwarven words we know. Galadriel doesn't go there, but stays with Doriath partly because she falls in love with Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol. That is a relevant thing when we hear about Celeborn. We're probably talking about someone who is not, Galadriel and Celeborn may both have been born after the shipping of the Noldor and the Teleri and the Vanyar to Valinor is possible. Not necessarily the case. We don't know all the dates for those things, I suppose. Though I guess Feanor is born in Valinor, so presumably the rest probably are too of that family. But they're very old. They remember the time before the sun and the moon in both cases. Celeborn is of royal stock. He's a close relative of the mightiest Middle-earthen elf of the time. Turgon, on the other hand, and Galadriel learns from Melian, this angel of growth and flowers and beauty, whose daughter Luthien, the flower Nifredel, sprouts, we've already heard, when she's born. Nifredel, which will grow one day in Lorien and be under the feet of Arwen and Aragorn as they court. One reason Aragorn sees Beren and Luthien as a comparator, one of many. But Turgon remembered the city set upon a hill. So you have Finrod, he sees his uncle, his great uncle, Elu Thingol's Menegroth, and he sees the ability of the dwarves, and he sees all this stuff, and he says, I want that, I'm going to go for that. A cave fortress, which has like outdoor areas, but is a stronghold, a fastness, whereas Turgon remembers home. He eventually finds a hidden vale called Tumladen, and there will build his own city, Gondolin, one day. Morgoth, eventually he does go forth, but Fingolfin and Maethros, we see them as the leaders. Fingolfin is the High King. Maethros, though, comes across very much as a military commander, a leader of the peoples, certainly the leader of a great house that is separate from Fingolfin's house. They are not sleeping, and they defeat the servants of Morgoth. A victory it was, and yet a warning, and so the princes besiege Angband. They're like, no, we can't let them get back out again. And we get one more. We get two more little instances. 100 years after the Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle, the third battle, and then 100 years again. And the first of those is Morgoth sends a small army. It's not counted as a big battle because it's only a short campaign, and they get to Hithlum, but are defeated. And then 100 years later again, the first Uroloki, the first fire drake of the north, Glaurung, he's an important name, comes forth, does a bunch of chaos, but is driven back, particularly by Fingon with archers. It's a funny one. Morgoth's angry because he's like, you've revealed yourself. But it does, again, it's a warning. It's a warning. We hear the Noldor had the greater power of mind and body and were the mighty warriors and sages they built with stone, but the Sindar had fairer voices and were more skilled in music, save only Maglor son of Feanor. They loved the woods and the riversides, and some of the grey elves still wandered far and wide without settled abode, and they sang as they went. So this is a time of peace and victory. And we get reasonable detail about it, and the next chapter of Beleriand and its realms is more of the same. It gets a lot of detail about, and you get a nice map with the actual names of where the rulers are, all these different rulers, the elven rulers, at the high tide of the success of the forces of order, of good, the free peoples against Morgoth. Morgoth is stuck in this region, at least in Angband. and men may be beginning to come in, but basically it's elves and dwarves who live here, and you have great lords. One thing we should, I get one thing I highlighted, sorry, from these chapters is I often think Círdan is the second most powerful elf in Middle Earth before everyone else turns up, and the only person more powerful than him is the guy who'd been to Valinor, who had the light of the gods in his eyes. The glory, which is a Moses thing, right? The idea of seeing the light of Valinor parallels Moses, seeing the glory of God, and that idea of his face shining. So yeah, you have these places, each of them ruled by their prince. Fingolfin by in Mithrim, Fingon nearby, Turgon down in Nevras. So you got the House of Fingolfin in that area, and then Círdan and Finrod of the House of Finnifin. His brothers Angrod and Egnor are over there, and Orodreth there. So you've got the House of Finnifin here, Thingol and Melian, and then you have the sons of Feanor here, and over here I guess you have the remaining unruled Green Elves who do not take a ruler after their king or lord Denethor dies. This is the high tide, so we now get another thing where we're going to see a decline. We've had the spring of Valinor, and then we've had the noontide of Valinor. Now we have really the glorious afternoon of Beleriand. We have a time where things are peaceful, where there's lots of beauty, and we hear lots of things as we go. We hear this Círdan and Finrod are friends. Again, the kind of sea theme of the sea and Teleri and therefore Sindar themed whatever of the House of Finnifin. Finrod has the greatest realm, though who's the youngest. Fingolfin, Fingon, Maethros and Finrod Felagund. They are the four great lords. Finrod has the greatest in Nargothrond. Fingolfin is the overlord, though, and Fingon after him. Their own realm is this hard place. There's an interesting thing here that we do see that we see a part of the idea of good princeliness and kingship for Tolkien consists in taking the risks. Maethros takes the risks. He gives up the high kingship out of repentance and out of honour for seniority, and he takes the hottest part of the battle at the March of Maethros. Fingolfin and Fingon don't take the wealthiest places. They take, again, a cold northern realm near to the enemy. And Finrod and indeed Turgon, and a relevant thing is Turgon also ends up being a high king of the Noldor. Finrod is not a high king, but Fingolfin, Fingon and Turgon are all high kings of the Noldor at one point or another. Finrod and Turgon both take the mission from Ulmo of finding and building strongholds and putting their wealth and ability into that, so that there are places to flee. The other high king of the Noldor is Gil-galad, Fingon's son. Gil-galad, who dies in the last alliance, and that is the last high king of the Noldor. After that, there's no organised Noldor realms. Lindon, his realm, there's not enough Noldor left to make it worthwhile. Lots go west. Círdan kind of rules that area, and Elrond has really in other terms, a fortress. It's a stopping point for free peoples with presumably a population of hundreds or a few thousand. I guess actually I say that there is one great Noldor-led realm, which is Lorien, which is not chiefly populated by Noldor. As we go through, we hear about East Beleriand and then Doriath, where Thingol lives, and the various rivers, and we hear a bit about their citadels. The citadel of Maethros was upon the hill of Himring, ever cold, wide-shouldered, bare of trees, flat upon its summit, surrounded by many lower hills, with a bitter wind. Thus the sons of Feanor under Maethros were the lords of East Beleriand, but their people were in that time mostly in the north of the land, and southward they rode only to hunt in the greenwoods. But there Amrod and Amras had their abode, and they came seldom northward while the siege lasted. And there also other of the elf lords would ride at times, even from afar. For the land was wild but very fair. Of these, Finrod Felagund came most often, for he had great love of wandering, and he came even into Assyriand, and won the friendship of the green elves. But none of the Noldor went ever over Ered Lindon while their realm lasted, and little news and late came into Beleriand of what passed in the regions of the east. Ered Lindon also being known as the Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains, which are the west of Middle-earth, up where the Grey Havens are in later times. And then the final section is of the Noldor and Beleriand is, as you get with a few other chapters, really a set of short stories. You've got a couple of big chapters which are really continuous stories, and then you have others which are so big. I'm thinking about Beren and Luthien and Turin, particularly that they are essentially they're not quite novellas, but I mean at 30 or 40 pages they're novelettes. Turin Turambar is 30, Beren and Luthien is 26. But in those cases you've got a structure where often there are many subsections. But in these mid-sized chapters, in some of the shorter chapters, mid-sized chapters tend to be a continuous story. Short-sized chapters sometimes have several stories going on to kind of just update you on stuff. And here we begin to continue to see the things getting tenser. Turgon finds his city. He's told, Ulmo does say, the doom of Mandos is on you and this will fail. But leave therefore, but he says, if this peril draweth nigh indeed, then even from Nevrast one shall come to warn thee, and from him beyond ruin and fire hope shall be born for elves and men. Leave therefore in your old house at Nevrast arms and a sword, that in years to come he may find them, and thus shalt thou know him and not be deceived. And Ulmo declared to Turgon of what kind of stature should be the helm and mail and sword that he left behind. Again, very Tolkienian foreshadowing in the Silmarillion. We know what's going to happen. Disaster will threaten Gondolin at some level. Gondolin can't be protected in the way that you might hope, just by having enough fights and beating enough people. But Ulmo says if you do this, then a miracle will occur. Functionally, a miracle. From him beyond ruin and fire, hope shall be born for elves and men. We'll get to that. And a third of Fingolfin's followers and a greater host of the Sindar come secretly to Gondolin. And though many years afterwards none passed in with thereafter, save Hurin and Huor only, and the host of Turgon came never forth again until the year of lamentation after 350 years and more. So which takes us forward to the fifth battle, that is. But they grow and they thrive and they make a wonderful city like Elven Tirion. It's fit to compare even with Elven Tirion beyond the sea. That is the highest praise, surely. In a way, it's a greater achievement than Nargothrond if it really reflects in people's estimation and experience this place beyond the sea, this perfect or once perfect place. But fairer, that he has trees made of metal. The tree of gold is called Glingol, and the tree of silver is Belthil, which should remind us of the two trees, that they are made to reflect the two trees. He is attempting to preserve that which is lost. He's built a mirror of that which was lost. But fairer than all the wonders of Gondolin was Idril, Turgon's daughter, she that was called Celebrindal the Silverfoot, whose hair was as the gold of Laurelin before the coming of Melkor. Thus Turgon lived long in bliss, but Nevrast was desolate and remained empty of living folk until the ruin of Beleriand. Finrod goes and does Nargothrond stuff, but now something else begins to develop, and this will lead to certainly one great disaster in the future. But Galadriel becomes friends with Meliam. She's taught by Melian, and Melian basically says, I want to know more about this. I believe not that the Noldor came forth as messengers of the Valar, as was said at first, not that they came in the hour of need. Galadriel says, basically, of what evil lies on the sons of Fëanor that they are so haughty and fell? Were you driven here, etc.? He says, near save that we were not driven forth, but came of our own will, and against that of the Valar. And through great peril, and in despite of the Valar, for the purpose we came to take vengeance upon Morgoth and regain what he stole. Galadriel has already been introduced as almost a pure-hearted wanderer. Rebellious, yes, so not pure-hearted. But pure-hearted in terms of she doesn't take part in the kinslaying. She continues not because, for her, it doesn't actually, we're not told, it's chiefly about vengeance, but for the beauty that's in the world. But she does say that this is why they've come, to take vengeance on Morgoth. She doesn't say about the oath, she doesn't say the kinslaying, and she doesn't say about the ship at Losgar, the burning of the ships. which albeit, of course, she is not guilty of. She doesn't want, in that case, she's trying to not get the sons of Fëanor into trouble. It's been reconciled, much like Angrod sees it like that, so does Galadriel. Now much you tell me, Melian says, and yet more I perceive. A darkness you would cast over the long road from Tyrion, but I see evil there, which Thingol should learn for his guidance. Maybe, said Galadriel, but not of me. And Melian explains to Thingol what's happened. They shall not be recovered, these Silmarils, I foretell, by any power of the Eldar. The world will be broken in battles that are to come, ere they are arrested from Morgoth. See now, Fëanor they have slain, many another as I've guessed, but first of all the deaths they have brought and yet shall bring, this is the Silmarils, was Finwë your friend. Morgoth slew him ere he fled from Aman. And then Thingol basically sees this as... He's like, okay, well look, the Noldor are going to be our allies then, because they're so angry. And Melin tries to warn him, he tries to warn Thingol about the danger of the Sons of Fëanor particularly. But Thingol says, look, you know, they're going to be more dangerous to them than they are to me. But Melin says their swords, their counsel should have two edges. The doom of Mandos is working out, and Thingol is being dragged into it. Thingol is innocent of it. Thingol, he has not disobeyed Manwë over leaving Tyrion upon Tuna. He was not in sin or error in getting lost in the Magic Wood and meeting Melian the Maya. His daughter, Luthien, then the most beautiful creature the world ever saw, is an innocent bystander in this that gets dragged in. And there's a kind of poignancy, isn't there, that Galadriel is the one bringing this poison in at some level. Not the whole thing, but as in... And she's trying to be honest, she's trying to be more honest than other people have been. But it's interesting, isn't it, that Galadriel carries a shadow with her. But things become... Basically, Thingol hears more and more rumours, and Thingol basically is angry that Finrod has concealed stuff from him, because he should have told him before. It shouldn't have been that he heard from Melian, who heard from Galadriel. And, yeah, Finrod's amazed by this, but then it becomes clear that Thingol knows about the kinslaying. And Finrod doesn't want to bring charges against other people. But in Angrod's... So Finrod's like, no, much like Galadriel says, no, or thinks, I don't want to get Fëanor's people into trouble over the burning of the ships at Losgar. Galadriel and Finrod also are innocent of the kinslaying. They weren't there. And they seek to... They are appalled by what they see as they arrive. But Angrod, this is a fruit of the doom... This is a fruit of the kinslaying. Angrod remembers his argument with Caranthir two chapters before or whatever. And he basically says, look, we didn't do anything. Other people did. We're named talebearers, but other people did this and we didn't. And Angrod spoke bitterly, telling of the blood at Alqualonde and the doom of Mandos, the burning of the ships at Losgar. And he just doesn't know why we who have suffered and didn't do any of this stuff should bear the name of kinslayers and traitors. Melian does see that the shadow of Mandos lies in them also. Thingol says they need to leave, though they can come back later. Because he's angry now, but he'll get over it for their sake. He will keep friendship with Fingolfin, but hear my words, never again in my ears shall be heard the tongue of those who slew my kin Alqualonde, i.e. Quenya is now banned in the lands under King Thingol's control. And that means that in most contexts where Sindar are mixing freely, increasingly it's going to be the case that Sindarin is a language. And so here we again see this loss of the exile. We see the House of Fëanor is dispossessed, but the whole of the Noldor, they lose their language in most contexts because of the kinslaying. And yeah, it lives as a language of law. Quenya doesn't go away, but it is less and less important as a language of rulership anyway, as a language of kind of common concourse with people. And there's a feast at Nargothrond, and Galadriel goes there. And this is where we end. Now, Finrod had no wife. Galadriel asked him why this should be, but foresight came upon Felagund as he spoke, and he said, an oath I too shall swear, and must be free to fulfill it and go into darkness. Nor shall anything in my realm endure that a son should inherit. He's going to one day, that's what he's saying, have to swear an oath that means he can't be thinking about having a family. He needs an oath that is almost like marriage. And not in the sense it's the same thing, but that it's as binding as it, and he can't have both. He can't, a bit like a monk or something, I guess, would be a comparison. And he prophesies he won't have a son. He hadn't had any such cold thoughts before then, but he had lost his love, Amarie of the Vanya, in the exile. She had stayed behind, of course. So that's where we end this section, and we've seen the two great battles that they've won, the Dagon Nuingiliath and the Dagor Agreb. We've seen little battles they've won. We've seen their glory spreading across the land. They've got all this extra stuff. They've got wonderful lands. They're hunting. They're having feasts. They're building fortresses that are beautiful. Nargothrond, beautiful in terms of it's like a second Menegroth. Gondolin is like a second Tyrion. These beautiful, wonderful places. They're learning crafts. They're becoming friends with the dwarves. I guess men are coming over and are coming into fealty and vassalage. And yet we see the doom of Mandos working out and like a poison seeping out. We see, it's interesting, we do see the wide range of references, I guess. You can begin to see more and more. You see the Norse stuff and you see the biblical stuff both coming at full pelt here. The great dooms and things like that, as well as this, particularly this David and Saul relationship, or David and Jonathan relationship, rather. Yeah, always and ever the great role of prophecy and the oncoming doom, which nonetheless is never free from the possibility of hope. And that's what we hear with Ulmo telling Turgon to leave behind a suit of armour at Nevrast, because through the person who wears that and comes to warn him will come hope. And that's what's going to happen more or less at the end of the Quenta. Anyway, if you've read those, tell me your thoughts on those, and I will see you next time for, I think it's chapter 16 to 18 next. See you next time.